My name is Caspian Johnson, and today I'm going to be talking to you mostly about giraffe in Cameroon. So a little bit about me first, just to give you a little bit of an idea as to who I am and where I've come from, really. So I'm a lecturer in conservation science at Bristol Zoological Society, and I guess I identify mostly as being a conservation ecologist. So that aside, I'm also generally enthusiastic about all forms of wildlife. So obviously today I'll be talking a lot about giraffe, but it really doesn't end there for me. You know, it could be anything from birds, reptiles, amphibians, fish, anything with scales, anything that scuttles, anything that slithers, anything that flies. I love it. It's all fantastic. So yeah, that has really driven me, I suppose, to become or to kind of be where I am now, and working at such a fantastic place like Bristol Zoological Society. So aside from being a lecturer there with the higher education team, I also do a lot of research, and some of that research I'll be talking to you about today. So my main research interests really are sort of animal space use, it's animal population distributions and population metrics. And really, I'm interested in using a lot of the technology that we have available to us now to enhance the way we approach conservation. You know, we're really, I guess, lucky and fortunate in this day and age that we have such a breadth of, you know, technological advancements at our fingertips that we can really readily use. So I'm really excited personally about the applications of all of these things, and you know, lots of other conservationists are the same. So trying to use these to really drive our field forwards and optimize it really. So my main passion, I suppose, is applied conservation, but applied conservation that is informed by scientific research. So rather than sort of just guesswork, it's guided, it's, you know, what we're doing, have a really good hunt on rigorous scientific data that it's going to work, it's going to be effective. So that's really my sort of driving passion, and those are my research interests. And this is something that's kind of taken me far and wide, really. And I'm very privileged to say that, you know, I've done a lot of research in lots of different places now. I started in Tanzania, was the first place actually, in a remote region of Western Tanzania, studying chimpanzees and yellow baboons. And that was really the beginning for me actually, and it snowballed from there. And yeah, next thing I knew, I was researching and working for a small conservation organization in Sulawesi with the crested black macaque. And I did that for 2 years, which was incredible. And then I came back, and that's when I moved back to Bristol. And on moving back to Bristol, I took on a postdoc position at Bristol Zoological Society. And this was sort of going back now only a few years. And so I worked on the Western Lowland Gorilla Project in Equatorial Guinea. And I think Gronya, our head of department, gave a great talk about that right at the beginning of this lecture conservation series. So if you missed that, I strongly urge you to go back to that, because, you know, obviously, despite having now moved on to giraffes, I am very passionate still about the gorillas. As you can see there's probably a bit of a pattern. You know, it went from chimpanzees and baboons to macaques and gorillas, all primates, suddenly to giraffe. So I guess my background was primates. My PhD was primatology. And yeah, but like I alluded to earlier, it doesn't end there for me. I'm fascinated by everything. So the chance now to have branched out into giraffe is really exciting. So yeah, today, obviously, I'll be talking about the Giraffe Conservation Project in Cameroon, based there up in Africa. So before I do that, I want to just take a moment really to talk to you briefly about the conservation master plan that sort of this zoo is guided by as a whole. Now, we've got this 5-year master plan, and this really sort of serves as our blueprint for all of our things conservation related. And the importance of this blueprint is that it allows us to really maximize our conservation output. You know, it makes sure that every single penny that we spend is guided towards achieving this overall strategy. So that for us is a really important thing, and that's something that we have. Now, at its core, we have 3 strands at the Society of Conservation. You know, on one side, we have this breeding of threatened species. As you know, many responsible and modern zoos do, we have breeding programs for those species most at threat in the wild. And this includes things like the Bali starling and the Socorro dove. You know, the sakura dove that we have, for instance, at the zoo is actually extinct in the wild, and the Bali starling was once functionally extinct in the wild, and thanks to sort of captive breeding programs like what we have at the Society, has actually been released back into the wild, and now has you know, a healthy, or somewhat healthy population back in the wild. So the importance of these things are great. But more than that, we also do things much more locally as well. So we have breeding programs for threatened species that are, you know, on our doorstep, things like the white-clawed crayfish, for instance, or nearby as well, the desertus wolf spider. But we also have, you know, a great opportunity, really, and I guess with that opportunity comes the obligation. You know, as a zoological society, we have people come and visit, and when we have those people come and visit, our obligation is obviously to pass on all the information that we have, and to really try and inform people, I guess, of, you know, conservation initiatives that are going on, plight of many animals, and you know, what we as individuals can do to really contribute or make a positive difference. So lastly, of course, then we actually have our conservation projects. Now, these are numerous, and they actually stretch around the world. And we, in the next 5 years, as you can see from our master plan, we'll be working in 10 different countries across 4 different continents and on 18 different species. And you know, the overall goal here is obviously to work towards this sustainable future for wildlife and people. And you know, we hope to really push that message to up to 3 million people who will hopefully pass through our gates. And what normally do, obviously things are a little different now, but you know, that's the sort of impact that we really hope to make. So to give you an idea really as to where these sort of projects are distributed around the world, we've got this beautiful graphic. So as you can see, there's kind of a congregation really of our projects in both Africa, but also on our doorstep. And it's, I'd like to emphasize, you know, how fantastic it is that we have such amazing project right on our doorstep. I think really important. You know, the UK is often chalked down as not really being a wonderfully rich place as far as biodiversity or nature is concerned, but I really strongly feel that the opposite is true. It's truly is. For those who are willing to look for it, it really is got a fantastic amount of nature to find. And so some of these projects really contribute to making sure that nature is persisting and is surviving healthily. And we have an amazing native species team led by Jen Nightingale, who also gave a talk the other week, and they make great impact and do some wonderful work. And so today I'll be focused on this one here, obviously, and that's the Kordofan giraffe in Cameroon. So giraffe, we've all heard of giraffe. You know, they're the sort of classic iconic species of the African savannah. They are probably in every image that you might see of the natural African world. You know, they are quintessential sentinels of, you know, the backdrop, as it were, in the Serengeti. And they just really are so wonderfully prominent and important to that sort of landscape and to the natural assemblage there, that I think I'm greatly privileged, I guess, to be able to talk to you about them at such great depth today. So for those of you who don't know, giraffe are endemic to Africa, which means that they're not found anywhere else in the world. And they're distributed, as you can sort of see there, I believe you can see my cursor, in fact, distributed around this sort of outer region of the Congo Basin. The Congo Basin is sort of a big area of forest right in the middle here, and the giraffe actually inhabit this sort of sub-Saharan region around that rainforest. So lots of different habitat types, but mostly it's sort of the more open savanna woodland type habitats that you find the giraffe. Now, there are actually 9 different subspecies of giraffe, and these are, as you can see, represented by the different colors on the map. Now, although it's thought that there are 9 subspecies, there's also a prominent school of thought that there could actually be as many as 4 different species. There's been some recent genetic analysis that have kind of corroborated this theory, but regardless really is we have multiple different populations spread across the entirety of sub-Saharan Africa. And these populations and these sort of different subspecies, if you will, for now, are kind of separated both geographically, but also in their sort of physical attributes. You can really tell the difference between, you know, the general appearance of one subspecies versus another, you know, when it comes to their spot pattern, for instance, or the depth of color in those. And obviously the genetic makeup is also slightly different as well. So the big question, really, are giraffes declining? Now, unfortunately, I guess I wouldn't really be sat here in front of you now as part of a conservation organization if they weren't. So sadly, I'm afraid they are. Giraffes are declining, and sadly, they've declined by over 40% since 1985. So in 1985, there were thought to be around 150,000 giraffes spread across Africa, but now in 2015, that number is dipped below 100,000. So it's more like 95,000 now. And the reasons, I guess, for that are multiple. And the reasons why they're so multiple is because actually when you have a species, I guess, that ranges as far as the giraffe does, multiple different countries, obviously there's a variety of different threats that impact them around the continent. So the question of why are giraffes declining is actually a very difficult one to answer, and there's a veritable buffet of reasons why it's happening. But habitat loss, degradation, and fragmentation are some of the biggest problems facing giraffe. They are a really, really wide-ranging species. Okay, so individuals range great distances, and therefore they need a lot of space. And obviously, one of the big things that I'm sure we're all aware of at the moment is that space is at a premium. You know, the human population is growing around the world, in Africa in particular, and that puts a lot of pressure on the natural world. You know, people need space. People need space to grow crops or to graze cattle, or all these things that obviously contribute towards this kind of competition then with other animals. On top of this, we also see that there are incidences of poaching around the continent as well. So the illegal hunting of giraffe, civil unrest in many African countries, certainly up in the north, is a reason for concern as well. So obviously this political unrest that occurs, it is not conducive to the proper protection that might be seen in somewhere that's more stable. So this is also seen as a big problem. Now, there are also other changes that are happening in the world. Now, global climate change, for instance, what we're seeing is, drought periods in many places are lasting longer. The amount of available water is shrinking, and the amount of desert in the sort of Sahara is actually spreading. There's this process of desertification that's happening, and that is having many different impacts. Obviously, reducing the available space for giraffe is one of them. So those are some of the key reasons that are suspected to be driving these declines in giraffe. And these declines have led to now the IUCN, so the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, have now declared really giraffe to be vulnerable. And vulnerable basically means they are at risk of extinction. Now, this to me just boggles my mind. Like, how can something as iconic as the giraffe be a risk of extinction? It's boggling, but it is. We often hear that elephants are declining because people are poaching them for their tusks, or the rhino is declining because of demand for its horn. But no one's talking about giraffe, and giraffe are declining at a worryingly rapid rate. And because it's so quiet, because it's happening in the background, it's almost like this silent extinction that's happening under our noses. So one key message today that we want to kind of put across is that we need to be paying attention. So these are some of the most threatened, and I kind of want to draw your attention to those quickly. So we have the Rothschild giraffe, and you can see on the map on the right here, the distribution of that particular subspecies. And then we have the Niger giraffe over here. Less than about 400 individuals are thought to be left. And then we also have the Thornycross giraffe, and lastly we have the Kordofan giraffe. And it's the Kordofan giraffe that I obviously want to talk to you about today. So there are about 2,000 Kordofan giraffe left in the wild, and this is down by about 46% from historic records, which is obviously a really big number. And the reason, because of that, not only the sort of species as a whole is declared as vulnerable, but this is a subspecies actually declared as critically endangered. Okay, so that means not just vulnerable, not just endangered, but critically endangered, one step away from being extinct in the wild. So the situation for this particular giraffe is very serious. Now, Kordofan giraffe, you'll see there from the map, it actually sort of spreads geographically quite a wide area. So a reasonable question might be to be, well, there's quite a large distribution. Why is it so threatened? And the reason for that really is that where it's found, and these are sort of small populations that are isolated from each other, genetic flow is restricted between these populations, but there's also a lot of political unrest in many of these regions. That aside, though, we do have some strongholds for these guys, luckily. So we've got places like Zakouma National Park in Chad and Waza National Park in the extreme north of Cameroon, so up here. And we have, obviously, for Bristol Zoological Society, where we work, is the Bénoué complex, which is this region over here. Now, the Bénoué complex, you can see an enlarged map of it here, is kind of characterized by these 3 national parks. And you've got the Faro National Park, you've got Bénoué National Park, and you've got Boubenjida National Park. And Bénoué National Park, where we work, is sort of smack bang in the middle of all of that. And all of this orange region here are actually hunting zones. So you've got this entire complex between the hunting zones and the national parks that form this sort of the greater Bénoué complex. And there's a lot of movement that can happen between the different areas in here, and that's about 22,000 square kilometers, which is vast, really. And Bénoué National Park in the middle there being about 2,000 square kilometers. So within this area, we do have there is a conservation service, which is obviously a branch of the government which is tasked with the protection of the wildlife and the management of that land. And they're really there to sort of protect the park and the wildlife that's there. So these guys are our partners out at the site. So Bénoué National Park, there's a photo of it for you. I just want you to sort of appreciate that for a second, because to me, I look at that and I get lost. It's just a gorgeous, stunning view, and that's taken from one of our drones. And all you can just see this expanse of savanna woodland just disappearing to the horizon. And obviously right in the foreground there, you've got some gorgeous giraffe as well. But to me, it's just the epitome of what I imagine, what Africa really is. And it's this sort of expansive wilderness that is home to just such a gorgeous amount and variety of animals. And so that photo for me really does capture that. And so, as I said, it's a really vast area. And unfortunately, illegal activity is quite frequent. It's very common in this national park. And what we're noticing is that giraffe populations are in decline. Now, aside from that, we've also local extinctions have been taking place as well. So for instance, there are no more rhino left in the park when there used to be. The last one was shot about 20 years ago. Wild dogs are also no longer found. They've become locally extirpated from the national park. The cheetah has also gone locally extinct, and the African spurred tortoise giraffe appear to be heading in the same direction. And so we really obviously do not want that to happen. And that's why this particular project exists. So what's driving these declines? So I should mention as well, and I know it's too late, but this is the slide where there is a little bit of gore in the bottom right there. So I apologize for that. But that is the last one. There won't be any more. So what's driving these declines? The short answer is that we really don't know, okay? We're not exactly sure what is directly causing these declines, but what we do know is that there is a lot of disturbance that takes place in the park. And these disturbances elsewhere, we know, correlate with low animal populations. So it's kind of a very sort of strong hunch, really, that these, above all else, these 3 things, which I'm about to mention now, are driving the declines, not only in giraffe, but also in other species in the park as well. So the first one, and this is in no particular order really, is cattle herding. You get a lot of nomadic, semi-nomadic, and also sort of settled pastoralists in the park. And what happens is, come the dry season, when pastures are sort of at a premium, lots of the herders will bring their cattle into the national park, where they then graze them. Now, on the surface, it might not seem like that could really cause much of a problem, but they really do come en masse. We're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of cattle coming in every year, and they are coming in then to direct competition with other herbivores within the park. So that's a really big thing that we're sort of very aware of at the moment that could be driving these declines. Another one is the bushmeat hunting. You know, obviously lots of the communities around the national park, there aren't a host of sort of economic opportunities for them. And poaching is one source of free protein that is very hard to pass off. So the dependence on the natural resources exists there. And lastly, there's gold mining as well, which is that photo in the sort of bottom left, what you're seeing here. Now, gold mining is actually fairly common. For instance, you know, one study found that in the northern region of the park, 16 different gold digging camps along the river, along the Bénoué River. And on top of that, what you find, which almost further complicates it, is that when the sort of gold miners come to these places, is that a sort of a little, I guess, community builds up around them, which increases the pressure on the natural resources. For instance, lots of fishermen turn up to the river to then supply the gold miners with protein. You find that hippos are hunted for meat along the river. And as a result, there's a negative association between hippo populations and the presence of those gold mining places. So we know these things are not good for wildlife. Now, I'd like to come back to the cattle herding one, because to me, it's a really interesting one. And it's kind of further exacerbated really by the sort of the greater issues that are going on in the world. Things like climate change and desertification. You know, once where there used to be plentiful amounts of pasture land for cattle herders, there is now less so. So there actually is an increased pressure moving them into places like Bénoué National Park to feed their cattle. And so lots of these semi-nomadic tribesmen, the Mbororo, which are a subgroup of the Fulani ethnic group distributed across that sort of red region there of Africa, they've been pushed out of these traditional grazing lands. And they are bringing their cattle into direct conflict with wildlife. So there's a greater issue really that's at play there, and it's very interesting, but I just wanted to sort of, I guess, make a note of that. So who are we? Who's in the team? We've got Pauline Tiwa, who is our project manager on the ground in Bénoué National Park. She's been with us from the beginning of last year, doing a wonderful job of managing all of our day-to-day activities and making sure everything's really running smoothly. We've got myself, and then we've also got Dr. Gronya McCabe as well. And we've also got an animal manager from Bristol Wild Place Project, Will Walker, who also contributes to the project as well. But we don't exist alone. You know, we exist with partners who make us stronger and make us enable us to do much more. And those are places like Sikako, the Conservation Service, the University of Bristol, and the Gorilla Wildlife Service. So I want to condense really just to two main things that I want to talk about today. And these two sort of main things of what we're doing in Bénoué National Park for the purpose of conservation. And those are supporting law enforcement and research. So I'm going to take you through each of those in turn very quickly. So supporting law enforcement, this is a really key one, because obviously a national park is ultimately meaningless unless there is actually someone there to sort of reinforce the law, as it were. So if it's a national park, people are perhaps not allowed to enter then, or engage in illegal activities, then the National Park Conservation Service are the people there that are responsible for making sure those people don't come in. So what we find though is that obviously, like perhaps many places in the world, the Conservation Service in the area is under-resourced. So one of the big things that we are trying to do is really support them. And that's in many different ways, actually. So one way, obviously, is we support patrol teams. So we provide financial support for those patrols to actually go off and take place in the first place. We provide food, we provide kit, we provide equipment. And also another big thing that we do is we try and provide training as well when it seems appropriate. You'll also notice that there's a picture of a digger in the corner there, which might be quite a confusing thing to see, but actually bear with me because there is a relevance of that. Here's the real thing, and the digger is actually to open up new roads within the national park, which might seem counterintuitive, but one of the big problems there is that actually it's so vast and so big that the patrol teams are simply unable to reach parts of it as quickly as they need to. So by opening new roads, the patrol teams will be able to increase their coverage and increase their impact. So one of the things that we did was actually help purchase this particular digger, this wonderful machine and beast that you're looking at there, and just ignore the person in front with the weird goggles for now. Their purpose and what they're doing will probably become clearer as I go on through the presentation. So to come back to training then, back in 2016, we provided this sort of idea of, we provided capacity building. And one way that we did that was we provided not only sort of the equipment, so the drones, smartphones, and the like to the National Conservation Service, but we also provided all the training that went along with that. And we conducted workshops for all of those big national parks that are in the northern region of Cameroon. And the idea behind using these sort of technological devices is that actually it increases the savviness, for lack of a better word, of these patrol teams. So for instance, it increases their ability to detect illegal activity with things like aerial surveys using drones and using smartphones to collect information, whether it's information on the wildlife or the illegal activities. And that all then feeds into databases, which can then be analyzed and visualized on a computer. So those are really powerful tools. So we did a lot of training and work implementing that. Now, I guess, what does that all mean, really, at the end of the day? And so I'd like to just impart perhaps a few statistics of what these patrols have really accomplished so far. So our support has resulted so far in 2,100 kilometers of patrols within the park. And that's quite a long distance. Over the last 3 years, that's how much distance has been covered by foot from our patrol teams on the ground. And that equates to about 210 patrol days. And each one of these patrol days, there are about 10 eco guards or rangers that actually take part. So that's a monumental presence in the park for this patrol effort. And the result of that so far really when it really kind of gets boiled down, is the fact that 46 poachers, cattle herders and gold miners have been encountered and subsequently removed from the national park. So that's the protected area management support side of the project. Now I want to talk to you about the research side of the project. And now this side is quite interesting, and it might seem almost superfluous. Like, why do we need to do all of this research? Surely we know that we just need to do X, Y, and Z, and that's fine. We're sorted. Just do that. But I think the opposite is true. And obviously there's a bit of a balancing act that needs to happen there. But essentially, by doing research explicitly, by counting the giraffe, by finding out how many there are and where they are, and doing that, yearly or at a sort of frequent intervals, we can really create this feedback loop. And this feedback loop is incredibly informative, because what it does is it allows us to have a look at whether or not what we're doing is having an impact. And if not, giraffe numbers are still going down, or they're not going up again, then it gives us cause to stop and thought and pause and think about how to optimize our approach and change it to improve it. It also allows us to notice any declines or further declines of our giraffe or other species. But more than that, this research can really help you disentangle the reasons why they're actually declining. And that again is really, really important, because at the end of the day, the sad reality is that in conservation, we are very short of funds. We're very limited in the amount of money we have. And so we need to make sure that when we spend money, it's for the best, it's in the best possible way. And the only way that we can truly know that is through empirical data provided from research. And the end result is hopefully an optimized conservation approach. So what kind of research are we doing? So one thing that really works in our favor really is the fact that giraffe have a unique spot pattern. And this unique spot pattern is great because it allows us to identify a giraffe down to an individual level. And that's really cool. Essentially, it means that, by creating a database of giraffe, we can actually know how many there are. Now, I've given you, as a nice example of this point, I've given you 3 photos. Now, 2 of these giraffes are the same individual, okay, taken on very different days. Now, what I want you to do is try and find the 2 that match, okay? The first person to comment will get a shout out at the end with the correct answer, okay? I'll give you 5 seconds.
That was fast. Megan Williams already says 2 and 3, as does Lou Bell.
Amazing. Megan Williams and Lou Bell.
As does Finn, as does Amelia.
Brilliant. So that was how fast that was. That therefore illustrates my point beautifully. Look at how obvious it was and how quick you were able to see and identify 2 of those giraffes in those images. And that's just with the sort of human eye. So well done. 2 and 3 is exactly right. You can see the unique spot pattern most clearly, probably on this region of the neck. At least that's what I thought. So that's great. We can do that as a human, but now imagine that we've got thousands of photos from, you know, different national parks or within the national park. It becomes quite a laborious task for an individual to go through these thousands and thousands of images and try and figure out which ones belong to which individual. The beauty is now, again, like I said at the beginning, we live in the 21st century. Not only do we have vast amounts of technology that we can use in the field, but we also have incredible software we can use on computers. And one bit of software, for instance, is that which can actually tell an individual giraffe for you from the image. So it will take all of these sort of different point data from the pixels in the image as you're looking there on the screen, and it can then, with a high degree of certainty, identify that one as a particular individual, and it can put it in a database for you. So these are the times that we live in, and it's a great time, to be honest with you. It's very, very cool, and so I greatly enjoyed that part of the process. So that's great, right? Okay, the images of giraffe are great and that they're important, but how do we get images of giraffe? They're quite elusive, and you know, they're spread quite evenly across the landscape. They're low densities. They're very hard to find. So one way, obviously, that we have thought and is a great way of getting images is through camera traps. So camera traps, they're nothing new, but the technology is getting cheaper, they're getting better, and these are something that we've obviously explored the use of in Bénoué National Park. So we've got a number of these positioned out in the park, and they catch loads of great images, loads of really cool photos of lots of different animals, and they give us a vast amount of information. You know, there's a lot you can actually get from an image. For a giraffe, obviously, you can actually work out what individual it is, which is very cool. But also you can work out things like, you know, how many different species are in your national park. They are really, yeah, they just capture everything that's there, and they can allow you to create an inventory then of the species that are in the park. So to give you a quick idea then, look, we've got hippos, we've got porcupine, we've got cob, we get leopard, we get genet serval cats, we get buffalo, we get all sorts. And it's just, you know, it's almost like a mini Christmas every time that we get a new batch of images in and we look through them. And of course, we get our giraffe as well. So I'm going to play this video file for us here quickly, just so we can witness the pure awesomeness of giraffe seen from our very own camera traps. Very cool. And I'm afraid there is a but, and that but is that there is not, unfortunately, the answer to everything in this particular area. So we found when we deploy camera traps in the national park, they often get stolen or vandalized, you know, by people in the park who, you know, probably don't want their identities known or don't want to be observed. And so the problem for us there is that actually, you know, it costs money to buy these cameras, and then when we deploy them and they get stolen, you know, actually we lose the data, but we also lose our resources. So basically it's becoming tricky to use camera traps to really answer the questions about populations of giraffe in the park. So it's caused us to really sort of, I guess, step back and think again about how else we might be able to achieve this. So one thing that we've also tried is foot surveys. And obviously that means there's a team of people, they'll go out into the field and they'll walk a transect, which is a predefined distance. And on that transect, they look for different animals, namely the giraffe, and they record the presence of those giraffe. data, you can work out things like abundance and density estimates, and that can be really useful. So you do get really good data from those. But the problem is that, again, we're talking about such a vast area that it's really, really difficult to access these different regions. The animals are very shy. Remember, a lot of these are hunted and have negative relationships with people. So if the transect team are detected by the animals, then it's not very conducive to being counted. The conditions are very dry is the other thing. And now it might seem like that's so bad, but when you go out and you do like a 5-day survey and there's no water anywhere, then this is really challenging. It's a very difficult area to work in, and the lack of water just makes it really, really hard. Lastly, or semi-lastly, it's really time consuming. So to do these surveys across the different areas of the park, it takes a lot of time. You know, to do one of the transects in a remote region took upwards of 5 days. So that's not only time, but it's money as well. So obviously, people in the team, they have their salaries, and that becomes quite expensive quite quickly. So again, after this, we thought, you know, right, maybe we need to sort of stop and rethink again. And maybe there's another way that we can do this. And so that kind of brought us on to this sort of latest thing that we are now trying. And so the question we're asking ourselves now really is this now the dawn of the drones? So these are fantastic devices. They are very amazing tools, really, what you can accomplish with drones. Obviously, they can be used recreationally, and they can be used for many different professional reasons as well. So surveying from the air, you know, especially for large animals in Africa, is not a new thing. Light aircrafts have been used to count large mammals for decades. And the use of drones, however, in conservation, it's really only just begun. Now, the beauty really of drones and why they sort of could potentially outperform light aircraft is the fact that they are relatively inexpensive. And you get this very high quality aerial footage that gives you a lot of information. And so for that reason, they're starting to be used more and more in conservation. So this is something that we're really starting now in earnest, trying to explore whether or not it could be useful to us in Bénoué National Park. So this is an example of, and I hope the video quality kind of works okay for you guys. I'm going to play it now, but this is an example and taken from one of our drones. So hopefully what you can see there is a drone slowly panning over the landscape, and at the top of the image you'll see that there are some giraffe. And what that goes to show is that these giraffe are detectable from the air using drones. Now, this is great. This is really, really promising. And so I'll show you quickly another one here, just because really now at this point it's just gratuitous. I mean, these are just gorgeous images of, you know, Kordofan giraffe in Bénoué National Park just going about their business, just completely unaware of the fact that there's a drone observing them and panning around them, and it's just beautiful. So the other really cool thing really is that you don't have to just use color in your color sensors, rather RGB. You don't have to just use the sort of normal light wave in order to detect and record your video footage. You can use loads of different sensors. And one thing that what we did find is that although you can kind of clearly see the giraffe from that previous video, is that there are actually some in there that you may not have seen because they were either camouflaged or slightly obscured perhaps by the canopy of some of the trees. So because that would result in a lower detection rate of the giraffe, we're also exploring the potential use of thermal imaging. Now, thermal imaging, you know, it's got something as big as a giraffe kicking out probably quite a lot of heat, that would kind of go some way in negating the camouflage that it has in its environment. So by using thermal imaging, what we're hoping is that we'd be able to detect them more frequently or with a higher degree of sort of success, really. And this particular image that you're looking at now, which is very clearly a giraffe, I hope, but this image was actually taken at Bristol Wildplace Project. So this is one of the giraffe that we have up there. We took the drones up there and we used them to see how, you know, applicable it might be in that kind of very controlled environment before taking it out to the field. And lo and behold, obviously the the result is there for you all to see, but you can very clearly make out the fact that there was a giraffe there. Now, very quickly as well, the sensors, you can see here at the bottom of the drones, these are some of the drones that we actually took with us then on a pilot survey back in December last year. And this is where the sensors are positioned. You can see they're very small. And this one in the background, which is the Inspire drone, much bigger drone, this is the one that had the thermal imaging camera on it. And then this one is the Mavic Pro, which just had a normal color sensor on it. So when we went in December 2019, and now this was with the University of Bristol, part of a collaboration with the University of Bristol's Flight Lab. And for lack of a better word, they're geniuses when it comes to all things that fly. So these guys really know their business, and wonderful for us. They happily collaborated with us to see whether or not their technology and their ingenuity really could be used in conservation. So we went out there in December with a reasonable team, and we explored the use of different drones and different sensors to really detect these different animals. And what we found was that there was certainly a lot of promise. So this is a bit of footage then from the infrared, so the thermal imaging drone taken at the wee hours in the morning. And the reason it's taken in the wee hours in the morning is because actually it's much cooler. The environment is much cooler. And what that means then is that the difference in the heat signature between the ground and the animal is much more obvious. And obviously the bigger the disparity, the more clearly then it shows up in the image. So what you saw there then was actually two cob, which are small antelope, or medium-sized antelope rather. It's a mother and a young one. Now, what I really want to sort of highlight here is actually they're walking through really long grass. So the grass actually comes up the height of the animal, but actually because we're using thermal imaging, it's irrelevant. You can see them really, really clearly. So I hope you can see that footage quite well, because I do find it really, really cool. And so that's really promising, the use of thermal imaging to survey the wildlife out there. Now, the next step really is to kind of take it all to new heights. So we've seen that the sensors work well. We've seen a lot of promise there, but what we did a lot of the trials with were those quadcopters, the image that you saw at the beginning with the sort of rotor blades. Now, although they have some advantages, one of the disadvantages is that they're not able to go that far, because they have about a battery life of about half an hour, and they don't have a hugely quick top speed. So they can cover about 5 kilometers, which is really good. But when you've got a park which is 2,000 square kilometers, we needed something that's going to sort of actually be able to canvas the park, the sort of the larger area really. So what you're looking at there is a prototype then for a drone that could do just that. Now, this is a fixed wing drone, and the advantages of a fixed wing drone is that obviously it doesn't need as much energy to power the flight, because it relies on its gliding ability much more, which means that it can travel much, much further, upwards of 80 kilometers or so for now, and cover therefore a much larger area. Now, again, like I said, this is really early stages, but our ultimate goal here is a drone that really can do this flight or canvas the national park autonomously. It can do it on its own without the need for a pilot. Can go up, fly, locate, and record all large mammals, land again. We can get the data off it and know instantly how many giraffes there are and where they're located around the park. So that's sort of the pie in the sky goal at the moment. And this drone represents the sort of first step towards achieving that goal. Now, there's a long way to go. And our collaboration with the University of Bristol is in its early stages, but it's going really, really well. So they're coming up with a lot of ingenious ways around some of the challenges behind operating fixed wing drones in the area. And yeah, hopefully within the coming years, we'll see some real leaps forward in achieving those. So those are the sort of key main things. The next steps then for us moving forward. Now, these are to obviously continue our support for patrols and sponsor the opening of patrol roads. So use Digger now to actually open those roads to facilitate the quick deployment of patrols in different regions of the park. Then obviously, like I just mentioned, trial, develop and apply this unmanned aerial vehicle technology across the park. And then better than that and cooler than that maybe, and I didn't mention this yet, but is using their machine learning to automate the data crunching part of it, because obviously you'll come back with all of this footage across a lot. We're talking hundreds of gigabytes of data here. Any individual person or group of people, it's a lot of man hours to go and crunch that data. But luckily, like I said earlier, we have these sort of can be developed by very clever people, much cleverer than I, and you can use machine learning processes to automate that data crunching process. So in the sort of hopefully not too distant future, you have computer programs that will crunch that data for us and tell us not only these sort of individual giraffes, but where they are from the drone footage and how many there are. And we're really in the process of, we've started that process already. So yeah, fingers crossed that continues as it is. And then lastly, obviously we're a new project. We're a young project, relatively speaking, really. So since about 2016 was when we first sort of started in Bénoué National Park. But as we grow, we really want to expand our presence into the communities around the national park as well. Not necessarily to influence, but to give back and actually give a sort of understanding really of what Bristol Zoological Society is all about, why we're in the area and what we're doing. And we have a really strong education team here at the zoo, and I think that there's probably a lot of scope to, I guess, to use them in that process. So that really sort of sums up the Kordofan Giraffe project in Cameroon. I really hope you guys have enjoyed listening to me talking all about that. And obviously, just to sort of reiterate maybe what Mark said earlier, is that actually just by watching, you guys are really helping this cause, the conservation movement. So talk to people and spread our message. And if you're in the local area, if you're ever in Bristol, come and visit the zoo or the Wild Place Project. We'd love to have you here. And if you want, you can also donate to one or all of our conservation projects as well. This money goes a really long way, and especially at the moment. So if you'd like to do that, we'd be incredibly grateful. And you can do that by following the QR code. And so just get your camera phone out and you just sort of put the camera function on and show that over the QR code, and it'll take you straight to the donation page. Or you can navigate there through the Bristol Zoological website. And lastly, thanks again for listening. So like I said, sorry, yeah, one last thing. This is like what Mark said, this is the 8th or 9th in the series of stories from the field. So if you're kind of feeling savvy with your QR codes, you can actually scan this bottom right QR code over here, and you can see all of the other episodes from my wonderful and amazing colleagues on our YouTube channel. And then above that, if you're interested in finding out a little bit more, you can navigate to the actual Bristol Zoo website, where we detail and go through all of our conservation projects. So please do give those a gander. But otherwise, again, thank you ever so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you very much indeed, Caspian. That was fantastic. So we've already had quite a few comments and questions. One question and a couple of comments from Amy Fitzmaurice that I'm just going to share with you. And in fact, Caspian, you two might want to perhaps exchange email addresses, because it sounds like there's quite a bit more that you might want to talk about. But Amy's first question was, does opening up roads within these protected areas encourage further poaching?
That's a great question. Actually, and when I said it, it's kind of like counterintuitive, that the idea of opening roads within the national park could be good for conservation in the area. And I guess to really answer the question, it's useful to look at the type of poaching that takes place. For instance, if it were, areas where there's sort of high value species like your elephants and rhinos, then you tend to have more sophisticated styles of poaching. And obviously, when that happens, things like access via roads becomes much more of a factor. However, what we're seeing sort of, at least in Bénoué National Park, is that that's not the case, and that it's actually people that don't have cars that are sort of doing this, the majority of the poaching in the area. So the short answer is no, we're not worried that opening up roads and access within the park will result in more poaching.
Thank you very much indeed. I actually just wanted to make a quick clarification question, if that's okay. I was worried in case perhaps other people listening wouldn't know what you meant by a hunting zone. Would you just mind explaining to us what a hunting zone is, how it differs, for example, from a protected area?
Yeah, no, of course. That's probably a very useful point to expand on. So a hunting zone is an area where that's set aside for wildlife. So it's, in many senses, it's like a national park, but with the key difference that hunting of certain species and with certain quotas is legal. So obviously that's a very, very big topic in itself. I'm not going to try and go into that, but that's what those hunting zones are.
Thank you very much. We've got quite a few more questions. So there are a couple of comments from Amy, but maybe I'll leave those for a second. There's a comment from Hans who asks, so there is a multi-million-dollar project of AWF, which I presume stands for African Wildlife Foundation, in Faro, and the Wildlife Conservation Society, or WCS, in Babangida. And Hans asks, well, I'll give you the quote, which is, "You have less steroids but more brains. How do you compare impacts?" So you take that as how you like, Caspian.
Less steroids and more brains. Okay. Yeah. No, I think I clocked that one. So yeah. So there's a lot that went on there, but the African Wild Parks is obviously a big project that goes on, and that's definitely more prevalent in terms of, you know, the Kordofan giraffe species in places like Zakuma National Park. Then WCS, yes, they are active in places like Babangida and I think also Faro, and they're some of the people that have been responsible for doing a lot of the aerial surveys, at least historically. And so yes, no, a lot of that information is certainly very useful to us, and we definitely use it. In terms of steroids over, or brains over steroids, I don't know, brains before brawn maybe is the other way of saying that. And yeah, I think it's very, very important to consider your approach very thoroughly, especially, sorry, I've got a 6-month-old puppy who's playing very noisily by my feet. Yeah, so it's very important to consider your approach when it comes to things. And actually, if you want to really optimize and maximize your impact, then you do need to be very careful about how you do it and spend your money wisely. So hopefully that's, you know, what we're trying to do here, and hopefully that will pay dividends in the future. So yeah, watch this space.
Thank you, Caspian. There's a few more questions. I'm going to ask a quick question, an ecology type question from Mark Eisler, who asks, do Kordofan giraffes live in distinct herds, and what do you know about their social structure?
So giraffe, they are somewhat sociable, but they're not very sociable. It's kind of, yeah, they do sort of almost abide by this sort of fission fusion thing to a degree. But what I mean by that is you have these sort of small female herds that are maybe with young infants or juveniles that are still dependent on their mothers. And then you also will have the sort of solitary bulls that will kind of go around and in a more solitary way. So you kind of have a bit of a mix. You have giraffe that are in sort of small groups, and then you have giraffe that are sort of more solitary. Now, again, there are exceptions to that rule, and in some places, in some countries, they are found in much greater numbers. So it does seem to depend on sort of what subspecies you're considering and where they are.
As we're nearly out of time, if it's okay, I'll just ask one quick question, and then I'll briefly mention the next conservation lecture. So a quick question from Lou, who asks, what do you think about this new species classification, or this potential new species classification?
It's a really interesting one, and actually it's not, you know, perhaps as straightforward as it at first seems. So I guess the implications are that it just simply divides up, you know, one species into 4. And we've seen that actually be quite a powerful conservation tool in the past. I mean, if you look at things like lemurs, recently we've seen almost, you know, a diversity explosion because of new genetic analyses. And at the surface, it almost seems kind of torn, really. You'll tell in a moment when I sort of go into it a bit more. But on one hand, you kind of have this idea that, you know, you've just now got too many species that you can't keep track of, and all of them as individual species suddenly become much more threatened because you've essentially made them smaller by dividing them. But then that's kind of counteracted in my mind by the fact that, you know, individual species, though they might sort of look similar, they are actually quite different. They might be very different in their sort of feeding behavior, in their sort of social behavior. And those sorts of things are very relevant to their conservation. So I think it can be really powerful to treat them as separate, especially from a sort of conservation perspective. So, you know, I'm not a geneticist, so I can't really corroborate or not the accuracy of those taxonomic, new taxonomic classifications, but I do see their potential in their conservation.
Thank you very much indeed. Caspian, would you mind unsharing your screen? And then Absolutely. I'll share for a second just to show people what's coming up next.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So if I share this, there we go. So firstly, Caspian, again, thank you very much indeed for another great talk.
Thank you so much.
And our next talk is going to be from Dr. Faye Clark, and we're deviating slightly. This is not going to be a stories from the field. It's going to be stories from the zoo. Faye is our expert in animal cognition and welfare, and is going to give a talk entitled Brain Training in the Zoo, Linking Animal Cognition, Behavior and Welfare. That's scheduled for the 7th of October. As ever, I'll send out emails in advance with the links to that Zoom talk, and I'll also be sending out the link to the recording of this talk on YouTube. But again, thank you all very much for joining us, and thank you again, Caspian, for your great talk. And I'll see you in a few weeks' time.